Welcome to a rather hastily assembled Res session. This was originally going to be about DadQuest, but unfortunately the developer of DadQuest had some flights cancelled. He was unable to make it. He sent along some very, very rude comments about United Airlines, who apparently you should never fly with. And so instead we've got some gentlemen here who very kindly volunteered to step into the breach to have a chat about publishing. This is one of those kind of perennial kind of topics. We kind of covered it in the Res sessions before. Obviously, Steam, digital storefronts, that kind of thing, it's possible to go it alone, and lots of people do. But there is still kind of increasing role for games publishers to kind of help smaller developers reach a bigger audience, enjoy more success. So I thought we could have a chat with some guys from a kind of good spread of kind of publishing types, about how that works, what they offer, if you're an indie looking to pitch a publisher, how you should do that. So hopefully that will prove useful. So I'm Jon Hicks, I'm from Res. I'll be kind of leading the questions. So I'm going to have a bit of a chat with the guys myself, and then I'll throw it open to QA. So if you have any particular questions you want to ask them, please save them for the end. So to our panel, so we've got Paul Kildare-Taylor from Mode7 Games, who's here with Pros and Synapse and Tokyo 42. We've got Florian from THQ Nordic, who are over there. So if you, actually, I can't remember what the full lineup of games I've got, but it's quite a few. Yes, and Greg from Double Fine. So Double Fine, famously home of Tim Schafer and A Broken Age and all that kind of stuff, and they're downstairs with Gang Beasts and Knights and Bikes and that kind of stuff. So I guess the first question would be, in terms of when, as publishers, what do you kind of offer to indies? Like, if you had to justify to the audience why they should work with you, what would be the kind of the sort of top of your head thing?
For us, we've only published one game, which isn't out yet, so to make big sweeping general statements about what we do is quite hard. But what we wanted to do was basically kind of meet the needs of the developer. And in this case, in Tokyo 42's case, they needed full funding, they needed PR and marketing, they needed design consultancy, they needed project management, localization, QA, everything, platform holder relationships, everything. So we kind of jumped in at the deep end and did a sort of full spread, but we're definitely interested in working with teams who need one part of that or all of it. Again, we want to be very, very flexible. And the way that we've approached this and that we want to approach other things is that we treat a game as if it was one of our own games. And you can see from the stuff that we've released how we handle it, the kind of marketing we do, the kind of amount we spend on things. If that's what a team needs, then we can do that, but we can't do things that other people here might be able to do, which are kind of bigger scope and other things like that.
Yeah, it's mostly the things you just pointed out is what we also do offer, but we have a big variety of services that we have. It's just PR marketing is a big thing. I mean, not every indie publisher or indie developer is able to have a marketing and PR team who goes to every convention or reaches out to all the press and even more important, the YouTubers, streamers. There are so many people you have to be in contact with on a daily basis. And also getting your game present in stores, for example. Still, retail distribution is still a thing. If it's coming to PC, maybe not so important, but for the consoles, still a big thing to have like your Xbox DVD, CD in the stores. That's also something that we can do. And yeah, for us, it's a big mixture of what we do. We have our own IPs that we let develop by our in-house studios or by studios that we hire for that we cooperate with. And there are other studios who come approach us with their ideas. And then we make a deal with them. So we are basically offering all kinds of services.
Okay. Yeah, and I think for us, it's kind of, like we were talking about, we approach every game differently. So I think it's always a matter of what the developer needs. And for all of the titles we've done, it's usually PR marketing support for sure across the board. But then I think it's diving down with everybody else to figure out what they need in addition to that. And what I think we just want to make sure that we're not overstepping and that we're stepping in where people actually need help more than anything.
And what sort of, like, where do you, has there been any kind of identifiable trend in, like, where people come to work with you? Does people show up, I've got an amazing game, an idea for a game? Or do it's like, well, it's nearly finished, but I need help getting over the line? Or I've shipped my game and nobody's buying it, can you help? Like,
yeah, I mean, it's different. It's all over the place, for sure. I think the ones that are like the latter, where they're in early access or have already announced and just haven't gotten as much attention as they want, are kind of the trickier things. So in general, we try to get involved as early as we can to be there from the beginning and helping message the project across, announcements into release. So I think, yeah, that's a tricky thing. A lot of indie developers I've seen have already kind of gone down a path of self-publishing and then found that it maybe didn't work out as well for them. And at that point, it's a little bit harder to step in and kind of change course. So I think the earlier we can get involved, the better.
It's, again, a big mix. Right, literally, here on the show. Yesterday I was approached by a guy his game is already on early access, and he just asked, could you help me getting the game out in retail on consoles? Yep. That was one thing. And just like an hour ago, 2 gentlemen approached me. They had like a little sheet of paper. They said, we have a great idea for an adventure game. We're looking for someone who can make it. Can you help us? Yeah. And at this point, I had to say, unfortunately not, because we are looking for like at least like a running prototype or something, just not only a sheet of paper with some ideas, because there are, to be frank, there are thousands of good ideas out there. Yeah. But we are also looking for people who can make them into a game. And this is what when we step in, again, as Double Fine, at any point we can jump in just when the game is already kind of finished, and we can just put it to retail, we can help to to bring it to the market, to do the PR service, or we can just jump right in from the very beginning. We are also financing prototypes, for example, with studios that we know. So big mix of everything.
Yeah, same even from doing this for a short time. I feel like we need to find something that we disagree on, guys, because this is getting a bit repetitive here. But you do see stuff at various different stages and people approaching you. I think that the theme with things that are more viable tends to be that it's something that people have worked on a bit already, and that they have some things in place, and that they have at least a very clear direction. Like your kind of piece of paper example is you do see that, but it's not really often anything that anyone can do something with, whereas once it's at a prototype stage and it exists as a game and you can see art, then it starts to be something that you can actually engage with more, and that you can, your advice is more than just like, can you actually show me something?
And have you kind of discovered that, because my experience kind of talking to game developers is that lots of people go down and kind of seduced by the kind of self-publishing route, and then it's kind of only in the kind of later stages of the project that in terms of actually localization is a huge deal, or if you go through Greenlight, then you have to stay on Greenlight. There's no way to add a publisher in, or that kind of stuff. Like, have you? Are there any kind of common pitfalls that you've seen with the kind of when you're sort of working with developers at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot to unpack in there, but we've done, even in our own games, we've done it a lot of different ways. Like, we've self-published games, we've worked with major publishers in the past, and I think that it's different for every game. Every game has to kind of approach it in a different way, but you're right. I think that, like, the nicest thing is being able to get your hands on something and see it working and running, and seeing there's only so much you can convey in like a design document or something like that. You actually have to get kind of a feel for it and get your hands on it before you actually know what it's going to be. But from that point, then I think it's just a matter of wanting to be having time to help kind of shape what it is, and having time to kind of plan a marketing campaign for the project that kind of leads into release, and a nice kind of cadence is the best.
Yeah, I think problems can arise in any certain point. I just want to bring one of the coolest examples. I guess we all know Banner Saga, the guys from Nordic who made that. Yeah. And I was a Kickstarter backer, and so I followed on their Kickstarter updates all the time. And the game was in a very good way, and then I said, okay, now we have to send out all the backer rewards. So we 3 people here at the company have to pack dozens of packages of T-shirts and things, and have to take them to the post office and send them out. So then they kind of discovered how much work it can be. And this is a very small example, but to bringing out the game on different platforms, on different distribution things, in retail, to make a retail version, to get the age rating in all the different countries. It's just a bunch of work that you have to do. And if you're a small studio, and you just have people who are talented, who could just use their time to do something creative, productive, and they have to waste actually their time with getting age rating in New Zealand done, which is like just wasting of time for creative people. Then the publisher steps in. We can do all the stuff that makes no fun. That's what we are there for, and they can concentrate on the game.
That product management side of it, I think, is something that developers consistently massively underestimate, and I can say that for a fact because I think we slightly underestimated it. We'd heard all the horror stories about how difficult that process is, and we're going through it for the first time, and it is extremely difficult and time-consuming, and I feel glad that we had lots of advice, from our friends who've kind of been through it beforehand to kind of prepare us for it, but it really, really is something that that you do see a lot of people kind of saying, oh, I can just do that myself, it'll be at the end of development and it'll be fine, and that's really not the case. I'd say you need at least one dedicated person, at the very least, to get you through that stuff, particularly ratings.
Yeah, I think there's people who enjoy it, so they want to do it themselves, but yeah.
Why?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's true. A lot of the stuff towards the end is where it gets tricky because you're going through like maybe console cert, which is tricky for a lot of the smaller developers who haven't been through it before, and they're also just like finishing a game is the no fun part where there's just a ton of bugs and the not fun bugs that are just impossible to track down, and it's stuff that especially if it's like one of your first time shipping a game is just something that you can't really anticipate. So I think in general, we're just always trying to find people to help partner with us and just complement our needs and help push us, a little bit further than we would have been able to on our own.
And how does that? I appreciate you can't really discuss this in detail, but obviously there is a financial consideration to that. Is there any kind of pattern to that, or does that take different things? Like sometimes it's kind of money up front, or sometimes it's like, well, we'll ship it and take X% of revenue, or something like that. Does that like vary per game, or is there a kind of if somebody's looking to work with a publisher, should they expect a certain sort of deal?
For us, it's very per game. I mean, we have things that we completely fund by ourselves. Like I've said, we have in-house studios, so people are just employed at our company. We pay them on a monthly basis, so we pay everything. If they need electricity, if they need a new computer, licenses, we pay just every 100%. And of course, we take all the money because it's our IP, our game, and they work for us. But we also have just like partnerships where we just do some certain ref shares, of course. Yeah, we just agree on the terms, but it's completely. Yeah, it's always after negotiations. It's always different.
Yeah, no, we're the same. Every game's different. Yeah, I think. Yeah, it usually comes down to if you need money or not. Actually, that's the biggest thing. But then beyond that, I think there's a lot of different ways you can swing it, and hopefully, our goal is always try to make it easiest for the developer and do whatever's necessary for them.
I think in terms of what people should expect, generally, working with publishers, the publisher's going to want to take kind of revenue share, usually for perpetuity. But generally now, I think people would expect to retain their IP unless it was a kind of special situation. Yeah. And that's definitely something that's changed. That used to not be the case at all. You wouldn't expect to retain the IP. And every deal is different. Every company is different. There'd be situations in which the publisher would want to discuss buying that from you. But those would be my general expectations if I were sort of approaching publishing.
Yeah, I think it's only like a higher budget project that's like entirely financed by a publisher where you might still have an IP issue in question, but that's definitely gotten better over time. And there's also a lot of like public contracts that you can look at nowadays, things like the Indie Fund contract are live on their website, so it's a good kind of like touchstone for what a fair to developer contract looks like. And a lot of publishers have started basing their contracts off of similar kind of deals that are already out there in public.
Okay. And do you think, well...
For us, it's like we are happy to get an IP, if we believe in it, obviously, and but it's not mandatory. I mean, we're also working with people where we do not get the IP. Recently from one of our developers, we just had an agreement before, we acquired the IP afterwards, and they were happy to give it away, so this is also a possibility. But for us, IPs are a strong thing. It's great for us to have them.
I think that's a really good point. Like, if people are aware of what the value of an IP is, then you can have a more realistic discussion about it, whereas before it would often be kind of perhaps contractually buried a bit, or it would be something that the developer just expect to give up, to get any funding. Now it's like it's a real part of the negotiation that can happen.
Yeah, I guess that might be our first place where we disagree, but we would never take an IP from a developer. I mean, I guess there's probably a case where if there's like merchandising or things outside of the gaming industry that could be leveraged, that it could potentially make sense. But I feel like we've just been on the other side of that so often, where we've lost IPs to publishers that then never do anything with them, where we, made that, and it came out of our brains, and we have ideas for sequels, and we want to continue to support our games as much as possible. So it's always a bummer when we lose something purely as a contractual point that then never gets used elsewhere.
I was going to say, like, obviously you guys all represent publishers, so I'm probably asking the kind of wrong people, but it does seem like the horror stories seem to have diminished a little bit. There seems to be. No. I mean, we had an amazing session at Res last year about for a bit more developer focused about some of the publishing deals he'd been offered, and they were truly horrendous. But they do seem to be in the past, or is it something you still advise people to go into with at maximum suspicion, because the nice A&R man might actually screw you over? I
wouldn't say maximum suspicion, but I think stuff can still happen, because these are relationships effectively. You're forming a relationship with another company, and it has to be based on your trust of those people to some extent. So I have definitely heard about things going wrong, but it's often to do with misconceptions or sort of expectations that weren't clarified, or not necessarily sort of malicious kind of grabbing of things. But I think that's something to be really aware of if you're pitching a game to the publisher, is about who are the actual people that you're talking to, and what are their priorities, and what, have they done what they say they're going to do for you in the past. And I think if you bear those things in mind and you're really realistic about it, that minimizes the horrors, and also, good legal and stuff, basic stuff like that. But that stuff still does happen, but I think the ways to mitigate it are becoming a bit more obvious, I guess.
I mean, it's a bit like a relationship between just human beings, right? So you have to trust to a certain amount, and to consider extremely well with whom you fall in love, if you can, in real life, if you can consider that at least.
Wouldn't take it that far.
Exactly, and you have to look. I mean, just make your homework. That's what I would suggest. Look what the company have done before. Ask to developers who worked with them what their experience has been in the past. And if you hear some horror stories, you should be very suspicious.
Yeah, I think more and more there's just more and more indie-friendly developers popping up and publishers popping up. So I think there's just places to turn for fair deals, and it makes the ones that aren't as fair stand out a little bit more. But yeah, again, I think it's more when you start getting into bigger budgets that it probably becomes a little bit more tricky to figure out someone who's going to be able to, give you the fair share of the deal when they're the ones putting up all the money.
And in terms of, I mean, you may feel you've answered this already, but in terms of, if somebody would like you to publish their game, like what sort of, is it just acceptable to just show up with a build of the game, or is it like a case of, should they have already got a lawyer and a contract, or should they already have like all the budgets lined up, or what's the, is there an ideal solicitation from a developer from your point of view?
So I guess for us it would be, we are coming up with our contract. Usually they can check it, and then it's they don't need to come up with a lawyer. They should check every contract by a lawyer, definitely. But we will come up with the first idea for a contract that is usually made by us, and then they can say, okay, we do it. We have some modifications to it, and then still negotiations. Yeah. What you said was a prototype. This is something that we would say is at least the thing that we wanted to see, because just an idea is a cool thing. It could be good, but to see something running, to show that the guys who have the idea are actually able to make a game out of it, this is key for us.
Yeah, and I think we agree. And I guess there's been people who have come to us with just art and maybe a pitch doc, and I think it's always good, again, to get involved as early as possible. So sometimes we'll start the conversation there, but yeah, we're probably unlikely to actually sign until we can play something. And similar, we have like a rough contract in place that we can start from and figure out how to kind of bend to meet the needs of a certain project, for sure. And I guess we try to always make them pretty lightweight, because I never really wanted to dive into like a 10-page contract or anything like that. And in fact, we've done some on email in the past too. So I feel like it's more about trust and being able to highlight from high level what the important bits of the contract are for both sides.
Yeah, similar here. If it's someone whose work I know, or if they've done something that I can look at already, then I definitely would be interested in talking to them from a kind of game design document art perspective rather than a prototype. But certainly if it's kind of a cold approach, or if it's a first-time developer, certainly then a prototype is really good. With Tokyo 42, what they showed us was a single multiplayer level with full art in it. And that's actually quite a good thing to do, because it means that you don't have to do a lot of work on sort of AI for single player. You don't have to develop all the kind of level for that. But just seeing something running that gives you a good impression of the game, like a tiny vertical slice with full art in it, can have a real impact on you. Because then you can really really just visualize the entire thing. You don't have to do too much work. And contractual stuff, yeah, again, we would want to kind of use our contract. We've had a contract developed with lawyers who work with developers a lot, so it's a very developer-friendly contract. We wanted to make something that people wouldn't generally want to contest. And that's kind of where we come from on that point of view. So don't think that you need to have like this kind of array of like incredible legal stuff ready to go in order to approach a publisher.
And I guess the kind of final question from me, and again, maybe you're not the right people to answer this, but what kind of circumstances would you say it's not worth working with a publisher? I mean, are there some games or some genres or some kind of sort of statuses where you go, you know what, just go with it. You don't need the help.
Well, I mean, I guess I always feel like we need help, even on our games, no matter what. I think that there's usually holes to fill, and I think there's never a problem in having more hands and more brains involved, as long as it's the right hands and brains. But yeah, I mean, I guess if you're a team who feels like you have these kinds of things under control, then you might not necessarily need to. We've self-published games of our own in the past, for sure. But I think more and more we all are always feeling like there's just so many games out there these days and so much competition that the more people that you have pushing for you and rooting for you seems to be better.
For us, it's kind of we've self-published games as well, and I think the question is really, do you want to learn and get good at those other skills, or do you want to give them to someone else? So if you want to learn PR and marketing and get good at those and be able to do them for yourself, then you shouldn't work with the publisher, because you'll miss that opportunity. But it can be a risk. And similarly, other things, if you want to develop your own process for getting a game released on console that you can then reuse on future titles, then you could outsource that and kind of look at what the publisher does and see if you can replicate that, or you can try it yourself. It's very much about what you want, and I think a lot of developers sort of feel like they should have a publisher to work with, and that's never the right thing. It has to be based around what your project is and what your long-term goals are. If you think beyond your current game and there's a reason to not use a publisher, then don't use one.
Nothing to add.
Well, actually, something that's just occurred to me whilst Greg was talking, like obviously, there are so many indie games out there. Like for as long as Res just got huge, the industry has expanded so significantly in the last few years, and that kind of just standing out on Steam is just this impossible challenge now. And that feels like would you say that's something that a publisher can reliably help with? I mean, obviously, like Double Fine, THQ, like you guys have big presence and like marketing budgets and that kind of thing. Is that something that you can just say you could always help out with that kind of thing, or is it still again case by case?
I just go first. Before I joined THQ Nordic, I worked for a small German company who tried to be a publisher, and calling somebody at the press outlet and say, "Hey, I'm from that company," they was yeah, see you. That was basically like what I got a response. It was very hard to reach the people in press, to reach the multipliers. When you call as THQ Nordic, it's more, I would say it's more likely that they listen, at least, and have a look at what you show them. So there comes a name, and the name helps you a bit. Double Fine is pretty much the same. I think that for you is also the same. So if you have somebody with a reputation or with made-up connections to press people or to influencers, that helps a lot. It's like, basically, it's a big buddy business. If you know someone, it's more likely, hey, John, would you like to bring a preview for me? Then instead, excuse me, sir, you might not know me, but would you like to be able to write a preview about my game? This is a different, very different thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately there are so many things that just come down to the game and timing and a million factors hitting at once. And it's hard because games are in development for so long, like they take years. And so you can't really predict what the market's going to look like, and you can't predict success. So I think ultimately it's always a crapshoot, but it's true that we've shipped a lot of games, and we have built up a reputation, and we have things like our social media that's has a good amount of followers and newsletters and things like that. That we like to feel like there are definitely levers we can pull and things we can do that will make a significant difference. But ultimately, if the game just isn't the right game at the right time, there's sometimes not much you can do.
Yeah, it may not be about kind of necessarily guaranteeing the outcome. It might be guaranteeing the effort and the type of effort that goes in. And like I said at the start, with us, if we treat a game as one of our own games, then we'll go to kind of extraordinary lengths to get coverage. That sounds really bad, but we really try and push things as hard as we possibly can. And I think we've had a reasonable level of success with being the size we are and sort of doing the things that we've done, of getting to those bigger press outlets and getting YouTube coverage and all of this stuff. So it's really just about saying that you're going to put that effort in on behalf of someone else, really. And you can never guarantee, anyone who says they can guarantee, that this YouTuber will cover it in that way or that, then either something really nefarious is going on there, or they're lying.
Okay, well, that's all the questions that I have. Do you have any questions from the audience? Anyone? Have we answered everything? I know this one.
Hiya. I mean, one of the things that obviously lots of developers obviously have difficulty with is scoping their games so that they can meet deadlines. And presumably that's something that you have to stipulate in contracts, the kind of deadlines that they're going to have to meet. So how do you sort of negotiate those kind of deals?
I guess we try not to tie like payments or anything like that to the game's development too tightly, just because we know things can change and things move around a little bit. So I feel like it's more about being in contact with our developers and knowing where they're at and trying to just give guidance and feedback along the way to kind of decisions that we would make on the project. But yeah, I mean, scheduling is hard in video games. You never can predict these things and what it's actually going to be like until it's actually in the game. So I think it's just having somebody who is just another ear to listen to what's going on with the project and give you kind of like outsider's perspective on where you're at.
What we usually do, we assign a producer to a project. He's not necessarily on site with the developers, but he's on a daily basis. He's in contact with the developers. He can also try to help them to solve technical problems they have. And so we are pretty well aware of what the deadline is or what the schedule is. I mean, deadlines, you set them and you usually tie payments to them, like the milestone payments that you call them. And if they reach a certain point, but if they come up with a good reason why they failed that deadline, everything is fine. We can just discuss. I mean, it's in both interest to bring the project to life and to have a great game in the end. And if you just cut the money because they missed a few deadlines, I mean, if they tell you, okay, we have spent 4 weeks on holidays and nobody worked, that might be a reason to say, well, we should talk again and not in a friendly way this time. But yeah, basically, as I said, it's a common goal that everybody is working for.
We do tie payments to specific stages as well, but when we first meet with the developer and we sign a game, which is what we've done with this one, and also we have something else coming out that's sort of in development right now, so I'm thinking about this process quite a lot currently, is you try to make the schedule according to what they were going to do anyway. So by virtue of signing the game, they've had a sensible plan for how they're going to develop it. So you try to base it off that, and you make it a system whereby that's actually helpful to them. So they know that they really need to get this thing done by this specific time. And it can be features, or it can be vaguer than that. It can be the game should be in roughly this state by here. So you actually use it as a means of supporting them and kind of helping them regulate their own development. And then if something goes massively wrong, you would want to know about that straight away, so you can actually help them fix it. It's not a question of sort of leaving them in the lurch and then they turn up and you go, well, we're not paying you then, because that's a complete breakdown of the whole relationship. So you want to avoid that. Both parties want to avoid it. So it's not that thing of you're trying to kind of gate it as like some kind of weird incentive for them to do well. Like you're trying to mutually make the project work.
And there's one thing that I want to point out. I mean, if the publisher is coming to terminate a contract because they missed a deadline or missed a milestone, all the money he invested before is just gone. It's just nobody will ever pay it back to you. The developers, they just needed it to pay their salaries, to pay everything they needed to, and then it's just gone. So it is not in the interest of a publisher to stop the development of a game.
Okay, any question?
Hi, so I'm working with a team currently working on a VR project, and I just want to know if any of you sort of entertain pitches from projects based on VR, and if you do, what do you look for?
Yeah, I mean, we've released VR games of our own. We're excited about new hardware always. Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot to consider for sure. I think when we're hearing new pitches, we're always just trying to find something we're excited about creatively. So VR projects can definitely fit that bill. I do think there's like a lot of unknowns about the market and how well these games will sell. So If it's something that needs financing and a significant amount of financing, that might be a harder sell. But if it's just, you know, a project that's financed and we're just looking for cool projects, then I think that anything's fair game.
Yeah, I have to admit we are still sitting back and watching closely what's going on, and did not step into the VR market yet. And we are still considering if this is worth it. So we are like the, let's say, the lazy guys who let others do the pioneer work, and when it's a good market, we will show up.
I will say, if money is what you're looking for, there's a lot of people who are throwing money at VR. So it's not as hard to find somebody to finance that as much as maybe just a pure publishing relationship.
Yeah, we're not doing VR at the moment, and that's mostly because we're kind of interested in, I guess, sort of more established audiences that we kind of know a bit better. That's where we're going to really, really help out. So if you've got an amazing strategy game, then let me know.
Anyone else? Any more?
Well, actually, so going back to the scheduling question, I mean, how much do you monitor other release schedules from other publishers in regards to your own sort of schedules? So, for one example, last year, Titanfall 2, which was famously released at a very poor time, you know, in between two other major shooters, which kind of cannibalized its sales. So they said that they could not change the schedule, the release date at that point. But is that something which you yourselves would do? Because obviously that's a very different scale, but is that something you could do yourselves, or is that something you would think about doing?
Yeah, I think it's something we look at as we get closer to release. So I think these schedules shift around so much that you never really know until a month or two out what exactly it's falling on top of. But I mean, these days more and more, there's like never a good week. There's always a million games coming out. So as long as you're staying away from something that's like in the same genre and of a similar scope, then I think you're probably going to always have something good coming out at the same time as your game. But yeah, you won't really know that until you get closer. And I think it's, if you're on consoles, like asking those partners what their reschedules look like and trying to figure out with them where a good window could be. And if it means holding it a couple weeks, being open to doing that.
Yeah, it's the same for us. I mean, we are monitoring it, but to be honest, we are confident enough in our products to still put them out and say, come on, competitors, give it a try. But sure, you will try to avoid to be out on the same day if you like, let's say, making a football game be out on the same day as FIFA is, just for example.
Yeah, you're probably the publisher. Other publishers are worried about kind of clashing their release dates with, so there's that. I mean, I think you can only do so much with that, and it's generally a good idea to look at either things that are going to be, as you said, in the same genre, or things that are just going to dominate everything. Massive, mega releases, particularly with press, is really hard because they're trying to sign people to play those games, and they have limited resources. So being able to be a bit tactical and switch at the last minute is good. But there's only so much you can do, and the most important thing is the game. I mean, those huge AAA releases have a lot of different considerations in terms of timing, but for a smaller for an indie title, I think it can work coming out against or sort of near another big title, but you have to be careful with it and work on it tactically, I think.
Cool. Okay. Well, I think that's all the time we have. So thank you very much to our panelists, Mark, Florian, and Greg. Paul, Florian, and Greg. Greg is downstairs with Gang Beast. Florian is over there with all of the THQ stuff, and Paul is in the gallery area with Frozen Synapse and Tokyo 42. So, guys, thank you so much.
Thanks.